Hi, welcome back to Anything is Possible. I'm Tamara, and I live on the shores of Lake Chapala in Jalisco. I wanted to talk this week about dealing with the fear of Mexico, whether you're driving down, flying down, or just thinking about moving here or living here or visiting here. I belong to a couple of Facebook groups. One is called Moving to Mexico, and the other is called On the Road in Mexico. And every single day there's posts that they're clearly just very afraid of what might happen when they're in Mexico. And I have to say that I had some trepidation myself. You hear a lot of really, really bad news and things happening in Mexico that are very gruesome. So if you're thinking of moving here, you can kind of get that under control, because that's going to ruin it for you. It completely gets in the way of being happy and stress-free and enjoying the journey down and enjoying your life here. I know facts don't necessarily help people any with emotional situations like this, but I thought I would point out that guns are not allowed for the average person in Mexico. You have to go through a lot of screening, and you have to have a specific purpose as to why you own a gun to be able to even buy one, and they are not readily available. From what I understand, they're only available for purchase at a government store in Mexico City. So you have to go through significant screening and have a reason so security guards and people like that are able to have guns, as well as police. But the average person on the street doesn't have a gun. Just went through the Dia de Muertos season, and there's thousands of people gathered in every city celebrating and honoring their loved ones that have passed. Parades and congregations of people in graveyards, and it's just total chaos. And this is my first year here, and quite honestly, in the United States, if something of that magnitude would have happened, I can guarantee you that there would have been at least one mass shooting in a crowd situation like that. But nothing happened here. I mean, it's totally a respectful and joyful celebration, and that's as it should be. Talking about the number of mass shootings in the U.S. that happened doesn't really help, but I have to say that living here in Mexico, I can go to any event. I can go to the grocery store. I can go to a theater or a concert. I can go to send kids off to school without any worries at all about a gunman entering any of these establishments and mowing people down. It doesn't happen here. So I wanted to say that people keep saying, and they've said since the very start, that they think I'm very brave for having driven down here by myself with my animals and starting a new life and living here. But quite honestly, I don't feel brave at all. I think bravery, it basically means that there's courage in the face of danger, and I never felt that way. I did feel fearless. I mean, I felt without fear. I felt that I would be protected, that my life has always turned out just fine. I mean, there have been very difficult times in my life, but I have to say that overall, I mean, everything has always worked out okay. If you look at the statistics of the number of murders here, they're high, but doesn't generally involve the average citizen at all. A matter of not letting that interfere with your hopes and dreams. I wanted to say that a great example for me was my mom and dad. They drove down in an old Dodge Coupe in 1945, and they were young and they were very poor, and they just took off, packed the car up with what they thought they needed to have with them, and drove down to Mexico and traveled all over the country. In 1945, there weren't cartels. There were gun battles between groups of people, and I don't know exactly what the battles were about, but they were banditos, and it happened rather regularly. So I remember my dad telling a story that, they camped in this old car most of the way, I believe. Occasionally they would find a family that would let them stay with them. But my dad said they stopped at a farm out in the middle of nowhere somewhere and talked to the guy, the rancher, and asked if they could park in his front yard for the night and camp. And he said, "Oh no, that's not safe to park out in the open like that. Come and bring the car into my yard and pull it up next to the house, so you won't get caught in the middle of a gun battle." And they did hear gunshots during the night, parked out in the middle of nowhere in the fields there. My dad was totally fearless. I mean, he led his life just having dreams and going forward and expecting the very best of people and situations. And he lived to be 104 years old and never really experienced any bad things. They stopped and they met people all over. My dad was very friendly, and he knew some Spanish, not a whole lot, but enough to get by, and they got invited for meals and spend the night, and they just absolutely had a wonderful time. And they just absolutely had a wonderful time. So that trip to Mexico actually was something that I held in my mind. And I said, you know what, if they traveled down here in that old car and camped in their car and drove all over amidst obvious gunfire during the night amongst various factions, driving down and staying in a motel every night is gravy. So I just decided that wasn't going to let me not do what I wanted to do. I was planning to move down here a little over 10 years ago with my partner, who we had been together for 10 years. I came down here once, and sometime my dad came down with us because he loved Mexico. And we said, wow, this place is beautiful. We visited Lake Chapala. And so 2 years later, we came back again, just him and me, to research the possibilities of actually working down here. And it looked like it was definitely going to work. So we went back home and started packing like mad. It was 2 weeks before we were to be out of the house. I had a storage garage filled with what I was planning to have a moving van move down. And the house was pretty much emptied out. Just the final planning, getting the car ready and everything, and he started acting really strange. All of a sudden, he started throwing up all these questions, oh my God, we're gonna die in the heat, it's getting too late in the year, the animals are gonna die in the heat, what if we break down, we don't have a place to live, which was true, but back in those days, it was really easy just drive down and find a place to stay. It was off season. It was one thing after another, and he would dwell on it, and we repeat it, and so for about a week that went on, and then the second week, he really came unglued. He had a total mental breakdown. He was lying, crying most of the day. He couldn't sleep. He was pacing. Then he would collapse on the bed, and he was catatonic, staring at the ceiling, unable to communicate at all. He could not communicate. He was just staring at the ceiling. He let his mind just spin totally out of control with all of this negative thinking and horrible things that might happen. And it was just awful. But I managed to get him in his car and drive down from the mountains where we lived down to the Bay Area, and he ended up in a mental hospital. He was in and out of a mental hospital for a while and on heavy medications. So I still had to get out of the house. So I just went ahead with the packing during all of this chaos, got my car and drove up. I decided not to move to Mexico by myself at the time. I was so stressed with the end of this relationship. Luckily, his family took over and got him into the hospital. But I went up and stayed with my dad, and that's when I ended up living in Oregon for the next 10 years, up until just last year. I got to tell you that you really need to get a hold of it. If this is something you want to do, don't let that kind of thinking spin out of control. You have control over your mind. You have control over whether you sit there and hover over the news stories and read about all the horrible things that are happening. Know what you have to do it, and be prepared. But don't sit there and feed yourself full of negative stuff. And it's just like anything else. What you put in your mind is what you're going to feed. And you can feed happy, exciting, adventurous thoughts about what a wonderful trip it's going to be. Not too many people do that. It's really surprising to me when I read. It's not too many people think about the places they're going to go and the things they're going to see and the people they're going to meet and the wonderful scenery. And if you drive like a bat out of hell and say, I'm going to drive for 14 hours a day and just get to my destination, you're not enjoying the journey at all. You're not getting it. You need to take your time, experience the new things in life. Just last week, I had planned on going to Mazamitla, and it's a beautiful town up in the mountains with, it's 7,500 feet, so it's cool, and there's lots of fir trees, and it's very woodsy and mountainous, and it's a cute little town. And a friend mentioned to me that there had been some art activity going on there recently, and I thought, oh boy, So I looked up in the news, and sure enough, I read this gruesome story about what had happened. And of course, it did not involve average people at all. These battles between the cartels are generally between each other. So contacted the owner and went to cancel my reservation. She goes, I drive that road all the time. There's really nothing happening here. If driving on the road isn't just a regular person, you're not going to have any problems at all. She says, so I thought, you know what, I'm letting this fear get out of control again. Not keeping things in perspective. A lot of people drive that road, nothing happens at all. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to have fun. And let me tell you, the drive there was one of the most beautiful drives I've done in Mexico. It was absolutely gorgeous. Once you start getting up into the mountains and driving along it's green fields and beautiful foothills, and then you start getting up in the mountains and those wonderful trees. All of the vegetation changes from this tropical palm trees and things like that down here to a real mountain environment. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that the owner of the Airbnb kind of reassured me and got me back on track again. But if you're just vacationing, traveling on the road, there's a lot of other cars. You go during the daytime, it's like absolutely nothing happened. And I had the most beautiful, restful week. Absolutely glorious, and I'm so glad I did it. It happens to everybody. It is really easy to fall into that trap of feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be another statistic because, nothing is ever guaranteed, but the odds are highly against it. You just have to gain a little perspective of what the odds are. I mean, something could happen anywhere. There's never any guarantee. You go on a road trip in the United States, something could happen. There's just absolutely nothing that you can say that's going to change the fact that, yes, indeed, something might happen. There are things that do happen to people in terms of getting stopped by crooked cops and having to cough up money or being asked to. So there's ways of dealing with that. And one of the people that I find really helpful is Q Paul, and I'll link to his YouTube there that covers how to deal with crooked cops. I've heard that getting a dash cam really helps to keep them from doing anything. I don't have one. I probably will get one just as a safety measure. They're not expensive, and just seeing that they're kind of keeps them on their best behavior. Carry the number for the Green Angels. So if you have a breakdown, or even if you just start really freaking out for whatever reason, you can call them and they will escort you. So believe it or not, or if you have a medical emergency, they're there. It's like your on-call roadside assistance, completely free. The Green Angels are all bilingual, so you don't need to worry too much about that. If you have car trouble or whatever, you can just pull over and put your hood up and sit and wait, and they patrol the highways and will come and stop. But you also can dial their number and they will come directly to you. And the number to call on any federal highway or toll road is 078. And I will link to a website that has more information on the Green Angels. I had like a little folder that I kept all of my paperwork. I had documentation for my animals. I kept my tip in there. I had my passport and my temporary visa permit. And so I did get pulled over once when I was driving down, and it was really easy. I just pulled out this folder and got the paperwork, handed it to the cop, and he looked at it and said, waved me on. He says, looks good, everything's in order. So I wanted to say, once I crossed the border to Mexico, I had to say, it felt just like driving on any other highway in the U.S. You kind of forget about all the fears and possibilities. It's just a highway, and you're driving along through whatever countryside you're driving through, and you're driving along, and that's now. That's reality, and nothing is happening. I think if you have some sort of faith, you can always call on that. I basically just felt like I was protected. I mean, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I just felt that there was nothing that was going to happen to me that I wasn't going to be able to deal with. I didn't know that if anything would happen. And as it turns out, pretty much nothing did. Go into it with confidence. Don't go into it with all these fears and anxieties and stress. Like they say, love is letting go of fear, and the only way you're going to love Mexico is to not be afraid of it. I really appreciate you coming this time. I'd really love it if you could share some of your experiences and thoughts. You guys have been great about doing that so far, and I love reading your comments. It's getting kind of crazy, so I probably won't be able to respond to everybody in the future, but I really appreciate you watching, and I hope something here was helpful. I truly understand that being rational and throwing facts at people, it doesn't do anything when you're stressed out and emotional. But you're the one that has control over that, and you have control over what you allow into your brain. You can turn that around, and you can make this a wonderful, happy, joyous journey, and you can truly fall in love with Mexico, and I hope you do. It's wonderful here. I will see you next time, and I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.